Welcome to UE Systems Ultraprobe 15,000 Equipment Orientation for Airborne Structure-Borne Ultrasonic Inspection, presented to you by the Training Division of UE Systems Incorporated. Let's jump right in and start identifying all the parts of the Ultraprobe 15,000. If we look at the back end of the unit, here on the bottom picture, you have a headphone jack, 3.5 millimeter mono split. You have a power button for on and off purposes. If you look from the front end of the unit, looking at it, we see at the very top the camera with the flash. It also doubles as a strobe. The laser pointer, never point that in anyone's eyes. Infrared thermometer on the very front end of the unit. That is a spot radiometer with a 10-to-1 ratio, meant for up close work. On the side of the unit, the SD card slot. Push the SD card in, it will click when it holds. To take the SD card out, push it in again, and it will release it. The instrument trigger to keep live readings, as well as turn the laser on. Battery pack, removable lithium-ion rechargeable battery. The power button, located on the display of the Ultraprobe 15,000, operates to turn the unit on and off or suspend it. To turn it on, and please go ahead and turn your Ultraprobe on now and walk through all the selections with me. Press and hold the power button for approximately 3 seconds. You will see the UE Systems Incorporated loading screen. As the unit boots, this may take a few seconds. Once booted, you will come to the home screen. If you wanted to turn the instrument off or suspend it, you would simply press the power button again, and you would then see these options here: suspend, turn off, or cancel completely. If you suspend the Ultraprobe 15,000, then it will go into a sleep mode. To activate it, pull the trigger. Turn off powers it all the way down. Cancel means you didn't mean to hit the power button and you want to get out of this option, period. Next, the power down options as described earlier. Powering down the Ultraprobe is achieved by pressing and holding the power button, or simply press the power button. The power down options will appear. Suspending the instrument allows for battery conservation. Once you power the Ultraprobe on, this is the home screen menu. The home screen has 7 functional options to choose from: decibel display, setup menu for equipment customization, decibel and temperature display, route display for current route analysis, temperature display, IR only, remove SD for safe removal or save data, and the Bluetooth headset connection if the Bluetooth option is turned on. First, select the decibel display. You will be taken to a new display. Here's the decibel display. We'll go through what's on the display. The current time and date is on the top left. It is military or 24-hour format for the time. We need to make sure in the settings that this is the correct date and time. In the middle, the top center of the screen indicates which display the inspector is currently in. You are on the decibel display. And then, of course, the battery charge indicator. As the green wears down and disappears, it'll be time to charge the battery. Back to the left, when a route is uploaded, the asset location and test point are shown here. So the location or machine was named Motor 1, and the test point was named Motor Inboard Bearing, or abbreviated as MIB. This is from the DMS software from UE Systems. A route was created, built in that software, and then loaded to this unit. To the right, the current frequency setting. This unit has a range of 20 kilohertz to 100 kilohertz in increments of 1 kilohertz. To the left, the route application. We don't change the application from here. It's just telling us the application of this route is bearing. Sensitivity value. S equals 70. The sensitivity settings are 0 through 70 in increments of 1. Sensitivity can be thought of how much power is given to the unit to receive a sound. The quieter the sound, the more power I need to receive it, so the higher the sensitivity setting. The sensitivity is not a volume control. It does affect volume, but there is a separate control for the output to the headphones in the menu section. Here we have the highest sensitivity set, equals 70. The record number indicator. Records are 1 through 400. You could build a route for 400 test points. That is usually too many. We suggest 50 to 150 test points per route. If it has to be smaller, that is fine, but no more than 150. The longer the route, the harder it is to get good readings. Adjustable hotkeys allows for quick access to optional menus. These hotkeys appear on the display constantly. There is a function bar that we will tap at the bottom of the screen that brings up many of these options. Two of these options that we use a lot can be dragged here and placed on the display so we don't have to go into any menu to get to these options. We will show you how to do that momentarily. The decibel value in the middle of the screen. You either have dashed lines when you pull the trigger or a decibel, a numeric value for the decibel. Pulling the trigger activates this reading. If you have dashed lines, we need to adjust the sensitivity until the dB appears. When you let go of the trigger, it will freeze that decibel on the screen. The intensity meter with the sensitivity slide adjustment. We'll show you how to operate that in a moment. As far as the intensity meter, the blue indicates it's loud or how loud it is. The triangle marks for this particular reading, this is as loud as it got. So if I were to adjust the sensitivity down lower, the intensity would lower. The intensity or sensitivity does not affect what the decibel reading is. The decibel is the decibel. The decibel comes from the source, the bearing, the air leak, the electrical anomaly, the steam trap or valve is producing a certain amount of decibel, and that's what we will see here. This is the intensity we are actually receiving of it. To adjust the sensitivity, tap on the screen with a finger. S equals whatever the number may be. Once you tap it, a black box will appear when the equipment is ready to adjust. When you tap it, the arrows will appear on the right. Up and down arrows will appear in the lower right corner of the display. Select up or down to adjust your sensitivity. If it's too loud, use the down arrow. If it's too quiet, then use the up arrow. You may also use, without touching the S equals 70 at any time, the intensity meter as a slide to adjust your sensitivity up and down. You simply click on the slide, hold your finger down, and slide it left or right. Wherever you first touch is where the sensitivity will adjust. So if we had the sensitivity set at 70 and it was a really loud bearing, to get that down quiet and fast, you could simply touch the very left of the screen and it would knock the sensitivity down to 0. Or if it was quiet, you could simply tap the middle of the screen and it would jump to about halfway of the sensitivity setting. So remember, every time you lift your finger and put it back down, it's going to jump to that sensitivity. So if you're going to use it as a slide, once you put your finger down, keep it down and slide it. Don't bring it back up until you've set the sensitivity where you want it. Typically, we set the sensitivity as we're pulling the trigger and watching for a decibel in the middle of the screen. To adjust the frequency, touch 40 kilohertz. A black box will appear and you will be able to adjust the frequency with the up and down arrows on the right hand bottom side of the screen. Record position, the same. Touch the record position and you will be allowed to use the arrows to adjust what record you want to be on. As you save information as a permanent storage for record 1, I took a decibel reading, I did a sound recording, I even took a picture, and then I save it. It will then advance me to the next record, which in this case would be record number 2. If something was off, and let's say we were on position 4, and we need to skip the next 4 positions because that motor and pump was off, I would skip 2 bearings on the motor. So 4 and 5 is skipped. And then 6 and 7 because of 2 bearings on the pump. 6 and 7, so I would want to advance to record position 8, the next motor and pump, for instance. Let's get to the function bar. It's a short menu of quick items that we use regularly. So if you will touch below the intensity meter, a function menu will appear at the bottom. Once the menu icons appear, you can navigate through the menu options using the arrow on either side of the display. So there are more than the 4 that appear. You use these arrows to slide through the other options. So touch the arrows within the quick menu to view more options. And try to get to save if you want to follow along where we are right now. So scroll through till you see save. And we're going to show you how to bring these options into the key area. So the hotkey area, very simply, you will touch whichever icon you want there, hold your finger down on it, and slide it to one of those 2 positions on the left of the screen. That will bring those options there so they are always displayed on the screen without having to bring the function bar up by touching the bottom of the screen. Give you just a moment if you're trying that out. Next, once the data is captured, whether it be the decibel, the temperature, took a picture or 2, we took the RPM with the strobe, whatever we did, when that asks you, do you want to save this picture? Do you want to save this strobe input? And you say save, that's a temporary save. So it saves it on the onboard memory temporarily. To permanently save that to the record and advance to the next record, we have 2 options to permanently save it and advance it. The first option would be the diskette. So we call this the save diskette or the save icon. When I touch that save diskette, that's a permanent storage. That's going to take everything I did on that one record, the temperature, the pictures, the decibel, whatever it was, permanently store it under that one record and advance me to the next record. You have to remember to hit that save diskette if you want to advance to the next record. Just because it says, do you want to save this picture? Do you want to save this temperature, whatever it may be? Those are not permanent storage options, only the save diskette. The next option we'll see in a little bit is saving from the FFT sound wave recording screen. When we save from that screen, that's also a permanent storage option and advances us to the next record. So before we get into the FFT screen, we typically save our decibel, our temperature, any pictures we wanted, an RPM, whatever it may be, before we go to record the sound. Because once that sound recording is done and it asks you, do you want to save the sound recording? And you say yes, that does the same thing as the save diskette as a permanent storage and advances you to the next record. So next on the function bar, touch your function bar and get back to it. You will see route. You can also access the route from the main display, the home screen here. Either one of these will bring you to this display. This shows you the route, what was recorded on it, what was stored on it, and the order. So here you can touch and sort in different ways. You could sort by the route number by touching that, and it'll give you options to sort. You can touch by the record location and make it alphabetical or in the order it was. You can sort by what has pictures and what doesn't have pictures. Green check mark means it has a picture. X means it has nothing. Same for the sound, the speaker. That says we have a wave recorded or not by check mark or an X. And then you can also sort by decibels. Typically, I don't sort by this unless I'm trying to find out, did I store pictures or anything like that. I usually leave it in the original order for myself, but this is a user option how you want to do it. So exit from the route and come back to your decibel display, touch the function bar, and slide until you see, or use the arrows until you see input data. Input data will vary depending on the application that you have it set to. Every application has different varying data. For instance, a bearing might have RPM, temperature, type of bearing, split, needle, spherical. Test results would vary. Not NE means not entered. You will see that often if you haven't changed any of this in the software. Whatever you put that has a drop-down box like these will be options from the software that you can enter, load to the unit. So your test results might be nothing, lube, vibration, thermography, oil analysis. What is the next step? And when you load that to the route from that software, those options will be sitting in these boxes that you can choose from. Same for bearing types. All the different bearing types you have, you can enter. So that's for bearing. But for electrical, we might have voltage, what the component is that is emitting the anomaly, things like that. Valves, steam traps would have pressure, orifice size, pipe size, diameter, things like that. So it will vary depending on the application, but you can input that parameter info, we call it input data here, in here. If you don't already have it listed somewhere, this is a good place to start keeping all that information that you might need when something does go wrong. Moving forward, the next will be strobe. The strobe flashes the actual flash from the camera up to 4,000 RPM. And it is a simple strobe light, just like a timing gun for you guys that used to use those or still use them. You have to input the speed. It won't find the speed for you. But once the speed is found, it'll sit still just like any other strobe light. All right, so we input the speed and we input it by each number up to 4,000 RPM. Then we will turn the strobe on. When we turn the strobe on, it will start strobing. And obviously you're looking for it to stand still. If we want to view it through the display and possibly capture an image of it, we would hit the camera. If not, we would simply hit save, and that would save that speed. If we want to view it from the camera, we hit the strobe, make sure the strobe is on. We input the speed until we get it to stand still. Then we go to the camera. It'll bring up the camera. And when we touch the screen to save the image of the camera, and all you do is touch the screen to save it, it will imprint what the RPM was, what the frequency was set to, and what the record number was. Now remember, you are flashing the strobe, so anything shiny will reflect back at you. And of course, time and date and the location and record number. Then you can save that picture and then save it and exit out. The exit running man is an exit. It is not a save and exit. So if I don't hit save on one of these options and just exit, it saved nothing. All right, so go ahead and exit out of there. Come back to your function bar and then find view record. It should be next to strobe, which would be sitting here. These pictures are of one of the older firmwares that did not have the strobe in it. View record. View record is simply going to bring up all the information about the record that we are on, motor 1, motor and board bearing record 1. If there was a baseline, all that information would be sitting in here, who took the reading if that was entered, what the sensitivity was, what the frequency was, what the decibel reading was to begin with. And you see this is record 2. So this is a different record than we're looking at here, but it doesn't matter. It hit view record and it would bring up record 1 and all the information you might need to know while you're out in the field. So you could compare, hey, I think this thing is loud. I think this bearing is very loud. I wonder if the decibel rose. I could choose view record. It would show me the baseline dB reading. And I could automatically see how many decibels it rose. And if it's in a need of a lube, I wait and make the report for lube. If it's in a catastrophic failure and sounds horrible, I may raise the red flag right then if this is a critical piece of equipment, or I may wait and do the report. It just depends on what your situation is, but it is available to you. So exit, well, don't exit, go back to the function bar and you will see Setup Menu. If you touch the Home button, you would go back to the Home display. And then the Home display, you would also find the Setup menu there. So either place, you can access the Setup menu. So go ahead and access the Setup menu. And the screen that you're looking for should look like this: Preferences, Info, Reset, Upgrade, Applications, Exit, and Bluetooth. So move on to the Setup menu. And the first item we'll pick in Setup menu is Preferences. This basically customizes all the settings to the way you want it for your unit. All right. To adjust the instrumentation preferences, press the desired option. A green box will appear around the selected option, like you see here. And then you can use the arrows to toggle through what those options are. Okay. Once to accept it, tap it again, and it will disappear. So if we look up here first, Inspector ID, if we tap that, we would enter who collected the data, 3 alphanumeric characters. Most of this information will download to the DMS software to your computer. It could be changed in the computer and it would show up in here. If you change it in here, it'll show up on the computer. So it talks both ways. The Bluetooth is either enabled or disabled. If you're not using Bluetooth headphones or a Bluetooth speaker for this, disable it. Otherwise, the Bluetooth is constantly searching for something to connect to and you're eating up battery. So you would simply choose disable by using it, touching the Bluetooth. Green box draws around it. Use the arrows to choose disable, touch it again, and it will accept it. The green box will disappear. At this point, it hasn't saved that yet. So if we hit exit, it won't save it. If I hit OK, it saves it and exits. So remember, you have 2 options to get out of here, exit or OK. If we keep moving down the list, module type is next. Which module did you use? In some instances, things you scan, this may not really matter. In other things like bearings or anything that I want to repeat and make repeatable, I probably need to enter which module was attached to the Ultraprobe. Here is SCM, short for scanning module. You will find in the instruction manual for the 15,000 or for any of the Ultraprobes, as well as the DMS software, you will find what these abbreviations mean. And you can choose which one you're using. That'll save to the baseline record and keep repeating until it is changed. It'll keep coming back over to the unit every time you load the route and say which module it was. So you could look up to see which module was used on this particular bearing or route and know that we're getting the same type of readings. Display response, and that's how fast does everything react on the screen. I do believe this is defaulted to slow. I would change it to medium. Fast makes the intensity meter move too fast. It pegs out every time it hears a sound. So medium seems to be how we would think the display should react, and every time you touch it, the button or the icon, it actually does that second what it's supposed to do. Slow, sometimes you think the display is not working correctly, and it actually is. It's just in slow as a default. So change this to medium here, and you may get better reaction. Trigger features. Do you want to use the laser or not? It's a red laser. If I'm outside scanning power lines and substations in the daytime, a red laser doesn't do me any good. If I am constantly reading bearings, not really sure why I would have the laser on. If I'm out looking for air leaks in the plant, shooting at distance, the laser would help locate where that is. So if you're not using it, just like the Bluetooth feature, turn the laser off. There's no need to use it. Again, it's an option that would eat battery up. So turn it off if you're not using it. The alarm enabled or disabled. The alarm function on this unit is very nice. It turns the decibel red. It would read from the software what the first alarm value is. There's a low and a high setting for alarms. This would take the first alarm, the low setting, and it would turn the dB red. and alert you that this item is an alarm, typically used for bearing inspection when we are route-based and trending bearings. If you're not using it, then you can turn the alarm off. It doesn't really affect anything other than turning that DB red. Alarm record time. This is actually the record time. It's not necessarily only when it goes in alarm. So we can preset our recording times. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15, 20, 25, 30 seconds. Or we can manually record anytime we want up to 60 seconds. For a good FFT waveform, 15 seconds is best. 10 seconds will get it, 15 seconds does a better sampling. Electrically, most electrical inspectors, for whatever reason, like to listen to it a little longer and analyze it a little longer. So I see a lot of 30-second recordings. It doesn't eat up the space, plenty of space on the SD card. So it's up to you. Preset means when we get into the record screen, we touch the record button, it records for that preset time. And then when it stops, it brings up an option to save it or dump it. If you're in manual, that means you hit the record button and you have to count off how long you want to record and then hit stop button. All right. So if you're going to preset, 15 seconds at the very least. Headphone volume. This particular unit has a fairly loud output for the headphones. 90, I believe, is where it's defaulted to. 100 is really too loud for most people. If you turn it down from 90, the default value of your unit, then make sure for the person coming behind you, you either turn it back up or let them know. Don't turn the volume so far down that when they go to use the Ultraprobe, they think something's wrong with it, and next thing you know, you're sending it off to UE Systems for a calibration and possibly repair, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. It's just the volume was turned down. So discuss that as a group if there are multiple users here. Turn off time, enable or disable. Most people disable this. The screen has to be touched within a matter of seconds, or otherwise it'll turn it off. And they use the suspend button when they have long walks on their route or between sections. But you can go in and you can enable it and see how it reacts. And then you can set that turn off time once you do enable it. So the turn off time there is yes or no, and then turn off time to, you see in this screen, we're really looking at frequency adjustment for this one, but in this one you see it was set to 15 seconds. So if nothing was done to the unit within 15 seconds, it's going to power down. So that's how that one works. Moving on to frequency adjust, yes or no. There are very few reasons I can think you would lock the frequency from being adjusted. The only thing I can think of is you set the baselines, you've been running the route, you have someone very new that you're trying to teach to take readings, and you don't want them to adjust the frequency because that would mess up the trend for the bearings. It has to be at the same frequency. So once that baseline's set and you're loading the unit with that route from the computer, if the instrument setup, which is next, is in automatic, this is showing manual. If this was in automatic, it would read all the information on the baseline and preset to each test point what the frequency was, what the sensitivity was, and bring over all the information, including pictures and WAV files that you can review from that baseline. That's whatever's tagged in the software and attached to that baseline reading. It'll bring it back over to the Ultraprobe. So we could lock the frequency, make sure the instrument is in automatic, hand that to the new person. He can still adjust frequency and save information, or he can't adjust frequency. I'm sorry. He can't adjust frequency, but he can still save all the information without messing up the frequency. So you would choose no in the frequency adjust, and it would lock the frequency to whatever the preset is to. Otherwise, you would leave frequency adjust in the default mode of yes. Instrument setup is a little interesting and very important. In manual, it doesn't read all that information from the baseline reading. And auto, it would read all that baseline information and preset it to each test point to the frequency and sensitivity it was that you took during the baseline reading. So during baselining, we would definitely want this unit in manual because there is no baseline information yet until we store that information. So if it's looking for information, if it were an automatic and there is no information, it will go to default values every record point you come to. So let's say I come to record 1, we're in manual or we're in automatic, we're baselining. I come to record 1, I set the frequency to 30 kilohertz, I adjust the sensitivity to 25, fairly loud machine, and I store the information. It advances me to record 2. It is looking for a baseline information if it's an automatic. There is none. So it's going to set the frequency to 40 and it's going to set the sensitivity to 70. And I'm going to have to go through the whole process all over again. If I keep it in manual during baseline, then when I advance to record 2, it will be at the frequency and sensitivity that I left it at when I stored record 1. So for baselining, instrument setup should be manual. Once all the baselining is done, the unit can be put into automatic and left there forever. It's just during that baseline, and we have one route baseline, we're starting this route, we have to remember to swap back and forth. You'll remember when it jumps that there's a setting for that, and you can call us if you can't remember what it is. Units, standard or metric units, and this is for input data, centimeters, millimeters versus inches and feet. That's all that is. Frequency default. What do you want the gun to come on at? So if I am, wanting to use the automatic mode or whatever, and it keeps jumping to 40, well, I can change the default value to 30. So it's always coming back to 30 kilohertz. It's just where does it come on? It doesn't lock me from adjusting the frequency. And the same goes for sensitivity default. It's not locking the sensitivity. It's just where does it come on? All right. So you can change those default values. Now, exit out of that. If you changed anything, make sure you hit OK first, and then get back to the setup menu. We're out of preferences. This is where we were. And now we go to info. When you touch info, this is what pops up. Show the versions, set date and time, and calibration. So here we see the versions of all the different firmware that's on the unit. Now this is going to be old compared to what's on your unit. You just hit OK and exit out. The firmware has been updated a few times since then. Set date and time would be next. Very simply, brings up a Windows unit. This is running Windows CE, and you set the correct date and time zone. That's important because we keep up with the readings by date and time, and it also needs to match what your computer is. Not perfectly, but it needs to be on the same day and around the same time. Otherwise, Windows doesn't like it when you try to upload and download. Then the calibration due date would be next. Now, for calibration due date, this says 000000. Yours is going to say when it's due in. It's typically 12 to 13 months from when it was calibrated. So by the time this says calibration due and you reach that date, it's been a year since it's been calibrated. It's important to keep the unit calibrated. If we're going to take equipment out of service or scan electrical items that may save someone's life, we want to make sure that instrument is running. We suggest a 1-year calibration. Also, performing your sensitivity validation before each scan to make sure it's operating. All right, if you haven't changed anything in here, you can hit exit. If you changed anything, hit OK. The next item is reset. Select the reset allows an inspector to reset settings if necessary. The list, which is the input data here, is all your input data. So if you went into the software and you inputted all the different orifice sizes, all the different pressures that you wanted in there, and say you get out in the field and you didn't like any of those, you could come here and just say restore it, touch it, green box around it, toggle to yes, hit OK, it'll accept it, and restore just those items, not defaulting everything. Default settings, however, is going to knock everything out of the unit. It won't touch the SD card. Your route or information would still be on your SD card, but all the onboard memory, all the settings would be defaulted completely to the factory default the way it came out of the case. You're not hurting anything by defaulting it. it would just be a fresh unit, just like you pulled it out of the case the first day. So there is default settings. It is a way to clear the information on the unit if you've not loaded a route. When you load the route from the software to the SD card into the unit, and you load that route, the first thing it does is delete all the onboard information. It doesn't default the settings, but it deletes all the stored information that was on that onboard memory. If you weren't loading a route and you wanted to get rid of all that information, you could choose default settings. But if you do that, it's literally going to go through and default all the settings on the unit as well. So not a very good way to delete information on the unit. But if you're new and you're getting in here and you're changing things and you're learning how to use it, which I hope you do, I hope you mess it up really good, because that's the way you learn. Once you do that, remember, come to reset and go to default settings and just reset it. So, and then start fresh again once you really feel comfortable with the way everything is. All right. Next, if we go back to the setup menu itself, you see upgrade. We upgrade the firmware, not very often, but we do it. And if you were to upgrade the firmware, that would be upgrade program. You would download it from our website, put it on the SD card. There'll be instructions of how to do it, very simple. And then put the SD card in the unit, power the Ultraprobe on, and then come to the setup menu, come to upgrade, and in the upgrade program, you would choose, you highlight it, the green box draws around it, you toggle to yes, you exit out of that, hit OK, and it will upgrade. Fairly fast, just seconds really to upgrade that firmware. Upgrade language, same thing. If you're if we have a new language or we fix something in one of the languages that comes in, there was something wrong with it and you had to upgrade it, you would do the same thing. Load it to the SD card. There will be instructions of how to put the information on the SD card, and then put it in here and choose yes. All right, so nothing should be changed here from what we just did. I'm just telling you about it, so there's nothing to upgrade with right now. Just hit exit and get out. Back to applications. And obviously, I jumped the gun on that, but this tells us about upgrading the program, which I just told you about, and the link. So now we talk about applications. So generally, we don't come in here and choose these. Usually we load the route and the gun is in automatic, and it automatically chooses the application we're in. The application, the Ultraprobe doesn't know what it's listening to, so it doesn't really matter if I'm just troubleshooting what application it's in. But if I have a route loaded, it becomes important because of a couple of things. Number one, part of the nomenclature in the hierarchy of these routes is the application. So when you go to download, it's looking through all the different routes you have and plants that you built in the software, and it's trying to make sure that it's going to the right place. So if it was a bearing route, it's looking for one of those levels to be named bearing. So we want to make sure we're in the correct application when we're route based. Also, it does obviously change the input data field. If I'm in electrical, I can't input bearing information. So it does change that as well. Okay. And I believe we'll talk about exactly that. So if the gun's in automatic, it's going to choose that for you. If it's in manual, then you would possibly have to come in here and choose that if bearing had not been selected before. But remember, on the front display, you'll see what application it's in. It tells you right by the sensitivity area what application it's in. So if you're in the wrong application, come to the menu, choose the application it needs to be in. However, when you choose the application, if there's any stored information on the unit, it will delete the stored information. You'll get a little warning sign, do you want to proceed? And it will delete any information that's stored on the onboard memory. So here's a way that you could easily wipe out the onboard memory without loading a route. Just change the application. Let's say we were in generic, and I want to stay in generic, or let's pick something easier, something you might really do. Leaks. Let's say we're in leaks. We did a route leak. We stored the DB on the gun, and we took all that information. We did our report, but the leak is still, the information's still on the unit, and I want a fresh unit. So I would simply choose something else. I could choose electrical, and it's going to say, do you want to proceed? It's going to delete all the information. I say yes, but I'm going to go do leaks. So should I be in electrical? Well, it doesn't really matter, but simply change it back to leaks. And the first time you change that application, it deleted all the information on the gun and you have a fresh memory on the gun. Remember, this does not delete any of your presets or anything. Just the information that's been stored about records and all the records that are on there. All right. And it does not delete anything on the SD card. You need to put the SD card in the computer and use Windows to delete that SD card or delete the information off the SD card. Okay. If you haven't changed anything in here and there's nothing you want to change, we're going to go into fields and see what that's about. Fields is nothing more than the input test data. We're going to show you everything per application that's available to input data on. If, say, 2 out of the electrical, however many there are, 7, I can't remember, you never use, then you can come into fields and actually turn those 2 things that you don't use off so it doesn't pop up when you put the input data in. It's just a user-friendly application is all this part is. So most people don't use this too much, but if there's something annoying that you scroll through when you're doing your input data and you don't like it, turn it off. And then remember, if you change anything, don't hit just exit, hit the OK button. You hit the OK button out of fields and it'll bring you back to the application screen. And then if you did change anything, hit OK. If you didn't change anything, hit exit. All right. And then, of course, exit out of the setup menu. Once we've changed all that, we can exit out of the setup menu. We'll talk about the Bluetooth in just a minute. But exit is to get out of the setup menu back to the home display. Okay. Bluetooth, very simple operation. Works like any other Bluetooth. You turn the Bluetooth on, you enable it here. From within the preferences screen, you enable it. Then once you come to the setup menu, you select the Bluetooth option. It will search for anything that is locatable Bluetooth wise. You tap on the one that you want to pair with, and then it will pair. Once it's paired, you'll get a green check mark over the Bluetooth signal. Okay. And then, of course, exit once that's paired. And then you are connected to whatever Bluetooth. That could be a speaker, that could be the Bluetooth headset that we have for the 15,000, either or. All right, so exit out of all that, go to your home screen, and then get back to your DB screen. Once you are in the DB screen, just that plain DB display, I want you to touch the bottom of the screen and bring your function bar up, and then scroll till you find FFT. And once you find FFT, you're going to, once you touch that, it's going to look like one of these 3 screens. If nothing's ever been done to this unit, and this is a fairly new unit, you will see a split display. You'll see time waveform on the bottom and FFT analysis on the top. You can choose, which I'll show you in a minute, just to show FFT or just show time waveform analysis. So screen, what do we have here? You have controls on the bottom of the screen. So let's go through those controls. And it doesn't matter whether it's FFT, time waveform, or split. These are the controls that always show up. Stop. That's all that means. It's just like an old tape recorder. Stop. Okay. So that's whether we're playing the sound or recording the sound. That is the stop button. Next would be the play button. You could hit play and it will bring up options to choose which one you want to play. Now, these are not stored by the nomenclature you named it. It's not going to say motor 1, motor inboard bearing. It's going to do it by time and date and record number. So you need to know which one you're looking for. You could have multiple recordings on one record, but when you download the information, it's only going to bring over the last recorded sound you did. So if you recorded 3 times on one bearing, number 1 and number 2 won't be brought over to the software. Only number 3 will. If you took the SD card out, plugged it into your computer and acted like it was coming from a camera or an MP3 player, you go find the folder in the main folder that says wave folder, and you could actually go just drag those wave sounds onto your desktop, and they would all 3 be there. So they are actually on the SD card if you record more than once per record. And you can drag those sound waves off, or even the images, the pictures. If you took a picture, they will be in a separate folder on that SD card. Typically, we don't do it that way. Some electrical inspection does it that way because they're only analyzing the sound waves for severity. They're not trending a decibel. So they may only want the WAV files. So they'll just plug the SD card into their computer, open the card up, and just pull that WAV folder out of there, or certain sounds out of there that they want. Otherwise, you don't go in the SD card very often other than to delete it and clean it before you load a route. We always load a route to a fresh SD card, so we don't want it filled up with all those backup folders that it may put on there. That's just going to cause problems down the road with the SD card. So we always load the route to a fresh SD card. So if I did have anything stored, recorded, or baseline information, I can hit the play button and scroll through a list of sounds. I can also go back to the route screen, and where that check mark is, it says there is a sound there. That could be the baseline sound. And if I simply touch that, it will bring me to the FFT screen and ready to play that sound file. Okay, so play. The camera is nothing more than a screenshot. Let's say you're really seeing a 60 hertz signature and you're doing electrical in North America and it's showing you line frequency, and you really want to grab that screenshot that you're seeing right there. You could still do the analysis on the software of UE Spectralizer on your computer, but man, that's a pretty screenshot. I'd like to save that with the record. Then hit that and it will do a screenshot, ask you if you want to save that screenshot. It's a temporary save. Remember, we collect all the data, then we hit a permanent save. But that's, you could do as many screenshots as you want. Then the actual record button. The record button will invert in colors when it's recording. Remember, before you come in here, you need to adjust your sensitivity to 20 to 40% of the scale. And that's really between the second and third big hash mark on the 15,000 of that intensity meter. You listen to it anywhere you want, but before you get ready to come into the record mode, you have to bring that sensitivity down. All the Ultraprobes are ultrasonic microphones, are what they are. And microphones have to be controlled for recording. The input can be too much. So we don't want to distort it in the playback, and we also don't want the image to be so big that it's clipping the peaks off in the UE Spectralizer when we're trying to analyze it. So 20 to 40% of scale, which is basically between that second and third hash mark of the intensity meter on the main display. There is a setup gear cogs here that we need to go in and kind of adjust a little bit. All right, so let's go in by touching that gears setup. Once in here, you're going to see this. So on the left side of the screen, you have the dB scale, and this is just the y-axis of that scale. What do we want to see? 0 to 96, I believe, is the default. You could change it 0 to 120. However, I wouldn't want to change that top number to too small of a number. If I put 0 to 20, well, a lot of sounds are going to be bigger than 20 decibels, and it's going to clip them off, and I won't be able to see it. So typically, I leave this scale where it's defaulted. I'm able to see pretty much everything I'm doing with this scale the way it is, so I don't change anything there. On the frequency scale, I do. This would be the x-axis of the FFT, and it's showing you from 10 hertz all the way out to 5,000 hertz. Typically, the majority of good information that we see, the interesting information in an FFT, is in about the first 1,000 hertz of that signal. So I typically change this top. It only goes down to 0 for this one, or 10, not 0, and that's as low as that's going to go. And that'll be the left-hand side of the screen, the x-axis. On the right-hand side, the top frequency, I'm going to bring that down to either 1,000 or 1,500. Doesn't really matter. That way I'm not trying to squeeze in all those frequencies on a small screen. If I do the 1,000 to 1,500, I typically catch what I need to see there while I'm out in the field. All right, and then the time scale, leave it as defaulted. It does a good job. It displays it well. You can adjust it here, but leave it wherever yours is defaulted to. And then we have another setup area called control. And we do need to go into control because this may be something you do choose. So tap control. And when you tap control, you will see the following display. And of course, I jumped ahead of all my information there. So now, and we will see this. FFT, time series, or both. Well, yours is defaulted to both. That's that split screen you see when you come into the FFT mode. If you only want to see the FFT, then choose FFT. If you only want to see time series, then choose time series. That's up to you. The black and white plot will change the display. You know, it has that nice blue background and green, easy for the eyes most of the time. Might be hard to see in the daylight, so maybe we change the background to this black and white plot, and this is what it looks like. It's just changing the coloring. You can change from hertz. We do most of our sound work in hertz, cycles per second. You can change that if your vibe and you really like cycles per minute or have a reason for cycles per minute. You can change that x-axis on the FFT to CPM, cycles per minute. Logarithmic or linear scale, most people leave it in the, I believe linear scale is where it's defaulted. It's just going to slow it down or speed it up. It's gonna mess with the FFT and time waveform a little bit. I typically don't choose average because we're already delaying the signal already. We have to input the sound, run it through the FFT algorithm, and then show it on the display. So there's a little delay to begin with. If I choose average, I'm not getting a real-time actual as I'm looking at that FFT. I'm looking at an average of everything, but it will slow it down. You'll hear stuff and not see anything happen till a second or two later. So it's up to you which one you want to use. Most people just leave it to where it's defaulted. Then the one that really should be checked is detect peak. And all it does is bring up these little arrows that you see here, and any peaks that are sticking out, it'll give you what that frequency is of those peaks. Sometimes you can recognize certain peaks like line frequency, or it's divisible by line frequency, such as, you know, in North America and the Americas, 60 hertz, 120 hertz, 180 hertz, 240 hertz, 300 hertz. It's easy. If you're in Europe or Asia, you know, 50 hertz, it's even easier. It's divisible by 50, 50, 100, 150, 250. So if you're seeing peaks at that, you know you're seeing line frequency. So it helps with the FFT a little bit. So there's no reason not to have it on. So check, make sure there's a check mark in there. And then the last one would be exit on save wave. This is defaulted to off, but really it should be on. Once we get done recording and it says, do we want to save this recording? And remember, that's the second way to do a permanent storage and advance you to your next record point, which means we would want to be back at our main display where we can adjust sensitivity and everything because we're moving on to our next item that we're scanning. Exit on save wave. That kind of tells us, hey, it did do the job of storing the information and advanced us on. If you turn it off, when you hit save, it just leaves you in the FFT screen. If you look at the very top, you can tell it did advance you, but it's very small to see that at the very top of that FFT screen. So, and it doesn't prepare you for the next record that you're going to work on. So exit on save wave will save it. And when it gets done saving, exit you back out to the decibel or dB and temp screen that you were using previously. So I would suggest having that checked. Once you're done with all that, you hit done. That's going to take you back out to the first setup of the FFT and time wave, and then you hit done again and exit out. All right. Now, we were talking about recording and adjusting that sensitivity. And if you remember, there was a note that said 20 to 40% of scale, and we see that here again. So here, it's right before that third big hash mark, and that number one hash mark right there, that's the first big hash mark. This is the second big hash mark, and then third. Then there's a bunch of little ones in between, right? So if you adjust your sensitivity before you go into that FFT screen between the second and third big hash mark, you'll come out with a much better looking recording than this. The white is what we're supposed to be analyzing. The blue is the background. And you notice that's 100 dB up here and a negative 100 dB in time waveform. It's so loud that this is saturated. I can't analyze a white screen. It's clipped off the peaks at 100 and negative 100, or negative 100, sorry. It's too much. So we want to make sure 2 to 3 bars here. If we were to record before we get into this camera here, if we were to record with it this loud, it might not be distorted in the sound, but it would certainly clip all those peaks off when you went to analyze the sound wave. All right. So get back to wherever you are right now. Get back to your DB screen. This is the DB display we see here. So get back there. I'll give you a second. And when you get there, pull up the function bar by tapping the bottom of the screen. Scroll through till you see camera. All right. Tap camera. And once you do so, this is not a portrait camera. It does a fairly decent job. It's a fairly low megapixel, but it was meant for up close work or asset identification. What are we testing? It wasn't meant to take portraits of people. Okay. So remember that. So the flash, remember, as I said earlier, when you're using the camera or the strobe, it's a bright white light when it flashes and you're around a lot of metal. Sometimes, if you really want that picture, you may be better off to shine a flashlight on it and then take the picture, because the flash may white out the picture if it's too reflective of the area. So turn the flash on or off when you go in here. Then your zoom function. You can zoom. It's a digital zoom. It's not an actual manual zoom. You can zoom here, and the way to check the zoom is once I zoom to, say, the second one, I would touch view camera, see if that's the look I want. If it's not, then I need to exit back out to here and zoom it up another one. You cannot zoom once you're in the camera mode. Okay, so you have to zoom before you go into viewing the picture. All right. Then the actual camera picture, view photo. View photo is going to take us to an active live camera on the display. And before you hit store, you're just going to see the picture. You're not going to see all this detail here. Once it's where I want it and I want to take the picture, I tap the screen. When I tap the screen, it's going to give me this temporary picture. You actually get two images when you do it, a blank one with nothing on here, and then the one with the imprint on here of the information of the route, the sensitivity setting, the frequency, what record position we're in, time and date, as well as a little UE logo. And those, you get two downloaded, so you choose which one you want to use after you download. I hit save. Remember, that's not a permanent save there, though. That's just saving the picture to that record. I could still go do a strobe. I could still go do a temperature, and then go into the sound recording. So before I go into sound recording, I do everything I want first. The picture, the strobe, the dB, everything is temporarily stored. The temperature, everything. Then I go into the FFT screen to do my sound recording. Because when I say yes to save that sound recording, it's going to collect all that stuff in my basket and check me out and advance me to the next record. Okay? So really, you're just adding to cart when you save the picture, when you save the temperature, when you save the RPM, when you freeze the dB on the screen or freeze the temperature on the screen, you're just putting stuff in your cart. You haven't checked out yet. All right. When you do a sound recording and you say save, that's a checkout. When you hit the diskette that is on the main display, that's a checkout. Okay. So here it says save picture, and you say yes because I like it, but this does not advance you to the next record yet. You're just throwing it in your. All right. Now, I would like you to go back to the decibel display that you were on, get your function bar back up, and hit the home button. When you hit the home button, you're going to come back out to home, and I want you to choose dBFC display, decibel temperature display. All right. Once you choose that, it's going to look like this. You're going to see a decibel reading as well as a temperature reading when you pull the trigger. Remember, it's a 10-to-1 ratio, 10 to 1 inch spot, 10 inch to 1 inch spot. So up close. So at 10 inches away, I'm reading a 1 inch spot. It's not meant to shoot across the room and get a temperature. It's meant to be above the steam trap, above the bearing as you're doing your work. Okay. Now, let's see how this works. So the temperature, we pull the trigger, it gives us a dB and a temperature. But let's say I need to get my dB slightly away from where I want to get my temperature reading because of the offset of where the stethoscope module touches and where the actual temperature probe is. It's not aiming in the right place. or it's just a different place period for whatever reason. Well, what I can do is once I get it on screen, I can actually touch the temperature. And when I touch it, this is what happens. A line draws underneath it. That means it's going to freeze it on screen permanently until I touch it again. So that means I can now go pull the trigger again, get a decibel reading that I want, and not touch the temperature. Then when I get the two things I want, I can either go record or save the information. So it allows me to take the temperature reading in a different place by having that line underneath it. To get rid of that line, touch it and it'll disappear, and you pull the trigger again, it'll activate the temperature reading. All right, exit back out to your home screen. So get to your function bar, hit the home button, and choose this time when you're in the home screen, the FC temperature screen. All right, so when you choose the FC temperature screen, you will see this, and all it is temperature only instead of decibel. However, you get a chance to work with the emissivity on this. Now, emissivity being 95% is the norm, the kind of just, if you don't know what you're doing, leave it at 95%. That's where we default it. You thermographers out there that know the difference and you need to set it to something different, then set it. Otherwise, you leave that alone and leave it at 95%, but this is temperature only. All right, so again, 10-to-1 capture ratio up close, and if you don't know what emissivity is, then leave it at the 95%. Okay. The SD card removal, you can either power the gun completely down, not suspend it, but power it all the way down and remove the SD card, and then insert an SD card with the new route. Or if you want to leave the unit on for whatever reason, you can come to the home screen and choose remove SD card. All right. When I remove that SD card, it's going to say you may remove it now, safe to remove it. And then when it's out of the unit, it's going to say please insert the SD card to put it back in. Okay. Just follow the on-screen instructions on that. But remember, don't pull it out when it's on. You'll mess up the route. You could possibly mess up the firmware, but more than likely you'll just mess up the route and get an error message. But turn it off or use the SD removal. That's all we have for the 15,000. If you have any questions and you need any help whatsoever, please contact us at UE Systems Incorporated. Our phone number is 1-800-223-1325. Our email is info@uesystems.com. Our web address, www.uesystems.com. An ever evolving website. We keep piling information on there for you, so please get on there. If you don't see it, you can't find it, contact one of us. If you know your regional manager, contact them. If you know a trainer, contact them, or call the main number at 1-800, and we'll tell you where you can find that information. If it's not there and we can get it, we'll send it to you. So whatever you need help with, we'll do it.